Hi everyone, welcome to my review of Steven Spielberg's Minority Report from 2002. So yes, here we are, finally back with another Spielberg to talk about here. So it's been a while now. Last year it was, of course, talking about Warhorse. So yeah, that's very interesting there. Of course, I did start a kind of series, if you will, of going through Spielberg films. Of course, and in the end, of course, we will do eventually a ranking. But I didn't kind of say that this would be in kind of a short succession kind of thing. I wanted to kind of let it be gradual. As a kind of thing on the channel. But here we are with Minority Report, and yes, here it is. Blu-ray steelbook. Yes, very quite a nice steelbook here. It's a bit basic, but yeah, it's quite nice. And yes, of course, Minority Report is a film that I've been wanting to see for many years, and finally, I picked up a while ago. This Blu-ray, and yes, finally watching it for the first time the other day. So yes, of course, we must say. Spoilers alert for this review. Of course, there will be some discussion on different kind of plot points that could, definitely ruin the film for you if you've never seen it. So with that said, of course, come back to this review maybe once you have seen the film. So yes, yes indeed, this is a very interesting Spielberg, and it's a film I hadn't really heard. Too much about this one. A lot of people say it's a very interesting Spielberg, and very much it's kind of underseen perhaps compared to many of his works. It's a very, the idea to this. I'd heard that the basic kind of plot outline, of this film, and of course I did, just before watching it, kind of again refresh my memory on the basic plot, the kind of yes, the actual idea to this film, and it's very interesting in itself. I think the idea could offer a lot of talking points. It's such an interesting idea. This, of course, the year, of course, is 2054, and of course Washington is set in, and yes, you've got this pre-crime unit. Of course, these three individuals, that are kind of these psychics in many regards. They kind of predict different crimes. It's kind of so pre-crime unit. They predict and kind of apprehend the suspect before they've actually committed the crime. So of course you have this unit led by, of course, the chief being Tom Cruise's character of John Anderton, and yes, basically they stop the crimes before they actually happen, and yes, of course, deal with the kind of the suspects as appropriate, and of course, yes, you've got the victims saved, of course, before anything has actually happened. Very interested in this, and that kind of whole the whole kind of first few scenes I was just kind of wowed by, really. How it's executed, and I was just so interested in this, and just as I say, reading up on this, just this basic idea of this pre-crime unit, in the future, of course, eliminating crime because they're kind of stopping it before it happens. This is very strange, of course. Offers a lot of kind of as well, talking points on the kind of the whole kind of is this the morality of it, really. Is this kind of something that should happen, because it's very strange. Of course, it does deal with free will, quite a bit in the film as well, and that whole kind of that idea of the film is something that it can offer a talking point here in itself. Not even talking about how it kind of pans out in the film. So it's very interesting. It had me very much invested, and this whole kind of theme, free will, and how it's kind of kick-started in the film, I think was very commendable. I think the first kind of just under an hour of this film I loved. I really did. I love this film, and yes, I think after that, we'll get to that. It definitely goes in different directions. This one, it's a very different Spielberg, and it's a one that I don't think it's one of his best films personally. Just in terms, just my opinion on this. But I think at the same time, it definitely once again shows for many who say Spielberg only makes a certain type of films, which would matter, of course. But for that kind of comment, I think this kind of is one of them films that proves that he does many different films, in tone, in style, and makes very much a variety of films, and with different ideas, themes, and just very unique. This one is very different. I must say, I could kind of I would say it's probably close to AI and maybe War of the Worlds as well, in terms of style and the whole kind of the way the film feels at times. But again, War of the Worlds very different. But yeah, of course, Tom Cruise is in that film, and yes. Tom Cruise in this film, it's great, of course, as always, to see a Tom Cruise film. He's one of my favourite actors, I must say that. Of course, a lot of you probably know that I'm a big fan of Tom Cruise, and I do consider him, one of my favourite actors, especially in films like Magnolia, and Eyes Wide Shut. They are the two kind of films for me personally. But yes, Tom Cruise in this film once again is just so good. He's really just gives a great performance. His character of John, of course, he's originally the chief of this unit, pre-crime unit, and of course I love the way that this was set up. The whole kind of the different characters as well, all these different characters, and of course you've got Colin Farrell. In this film as well, and one of his early roles, and it's just great to see. He is great in this film. I think he was one of the best, kind of characters he played, and it's just this kind of this whole kind of the friction, the tension actually between Colin Farrell's character and of course Tom Cruise's character was really something that made the film very compelling at first. And yes, the way that this film is set up, as I say, so compelling. I love the kind of the scene, the first scene, of course, witnessing how, of course, they go about their business. This pre-crime unit, you kind of see in action, and of course, this individual, he's about to, of course, or it seems like that, kill his wife. As we see that whole kind of scenario play out, and of course, as we know, the pre-crime unit, including of course Tom Cruise, comes through into the house and of course stops this right before it's about to happen. And yes, that's kind of one of the scenes that really just I was so kind of invested in this film, and I think that was played out so well. The way that was directed, that scene, the tension there as well, finding exactly what door it was, of course, and that kind of the details in this film is something that really makes it. Well, I think it adds for the flaws at times, which we'll get to, but it really makes it so investing. Just seeing. The whole kind of moment when, of course, John is kind of saying, did the door, was the door closed? Did it leave it open? And of course, the whole kind of bit there just adds, there's moments like this that add, kind of a layer, of tension and something that kind of makes it more kind of involving in that sense. It's not just a simple, in that sense, case of them finding, a particular scenario, kind of a crime that's about to happen, and simply going to kind of apprehend this, stop this. It's quite hard, of course, quite challenging for this unit. So it's very layered. It's just so investing. I think so kind of balanced. The characters, the plot, just the world, of this. This film was very. Very impressive the way it was kind of balanced out. Spielberg really directed, this first hour, really quite wonderfully, and then of course, yes, as we know, Tom Cruise's character of John Anderton, kind of is, you could say, of course, Danny, the character played by Colin Farrell, kind of sparks this whole kind of thing. But yes, John is basically accused. He becomes one of the suspects, of course, for a potential future murder. So yes, then of course. He is basically a fugitive, and of course, after the kind of first half an hour, it all kind of picks up there, and yes, he's on the run for the rest of the film, really, and of course, he's got everyone pursuing him, his former team pursuing him, and of course, we learn, yes, it's 36 hours from when it kind of is revealed that he's meant to commit this murder, and of course, such a kind of interesting, flip there, the kind of turn to kind of really make, as a viewer, of course, you question this whole kind of, how, this system works, this perfect system, and that's the kind of the whole, the idea of the film, yes, it is to kind of question this, and then, of course, from there, you know, we kind of we can kind of discover different things and question things related to this. You know, for example, free will and morality. Of course, you know, the tale of morality, and of course, you know, it's kind of very, very interesting. Of course, John Williams does the score again. Janusz Kaminski, you know, working with Spielberg once again on the cinematography here, and of course they made some of the, you know, together some of the best shot films, of course, you know, including Saving Private Ryan, no doubt. But yes, you know, some of these films here, you know, AI as well. I don't find the cinematography, you know, it's definitely not some of my favourite, you know, kind of visuals. I must say that I think this is definitely. It's not one of my favourite kind of you know, visual Spielbergs by any means. I think sometimes it's a bit too much. It's a bit too kind of saturated and maybe a bit dull at times. But other times, you know, in other areas, it's actually quite stunning. And yeah, it's just maybe not, as I say, definitely not one of my kind of favourite Spielbergs and its visuals. And you know, as I say, not one of my favourite Spielbergs. You know. Once, of course, you know, Tom Cruise goes on the run, as always. But yes, you know, he stumbles upon different characters. But after this kind of brilliant, you know, thrilling kind of series of you know, action pieces here, you know, this is absolutely stunning. You know, the kind of creativity as well. You know, of the action in the film, these chase sequences. You know, I think this is a real callback. You know, to kind of particular thrillers, and I think it's kind of it kind of feels at times like a kind of a Hitchcock, you know, thriller, you know, classic kind of, you know, on the run film, but of course being a sci-fi, it's very different, and it's a very, very interesting kind of combination here. And yes, of course, thrilling action scenes, and I was loving them scenes there. It's absolutely amazing, really, really was. And yes, from there, you know, Tom Cruise, you know, his character John is kind of asking questions. He's looking for answers. About this whole scenario and how he can kind of save himself, really. And of course he comes across the original creator of this, and of course she basically reveals that he has to try and get Agatha, of course, who is the one that is really showing the kind of Minority Report. We learn that these you know, these Minority Reports, which are basically you know, Minority Report is a way in which you know, we're offered a alternate future in the film. So, you know, what if, you know, this this murder, for example, did not happen? You know, that part of the system is erased. It's hidden, of course. You know, it's kind of concealed, and that, of course, is, you know, within Agatha, in particular, of the three, of course, individuals there. And yes, basically, we learn that Tom Cruise's character has to go and you know, basically. You know, go and get Agatha. And yes, you know, it kind of, for me, you know, unfortunately, it did go downhill, you know, kind of, you know, after that kind of hour mark, you know, that scene perhaps, you know, with that individual, as we know, the creator, you know, of this system, I think that was definitely, you know, very interesting, but it's kind of where I started to, you know, not love it as much, and I thought maybe it'd just be a scene or two here that just wasn't, you know, for me as interesting as much of a kind of enjoyable, you know, scene perhaps. That's kind of what I thought. But then, you know, it slowly starts to kind of keep going downhill for me, unfortunately. But you know, Samantha Morton, you know, plays Agatha, and she, as I say, she comes into it a bit more in the second half, of course. You know, for really the remainder of the film, and yeah, so I wasn't a fan, you know, of this character of Agatha actually, and I wasn't personally a fan of this performance. You know, I didn't really get behind this at all, to be quite honest. And yes, you know, we have this kind of again really interesting you know, sequence with this eye transplant, and yes, you know, very very, very disgusting actually. You know, very gross sequence there. You know, with of course Peter Stormare, you know, plays you know, the kind of one who's helping our protagonist out there with the kind of transplant there, and it's a very interesting sequence. You know, as I say, quite you know, graphic there, and yeah, it's quite gross at times. But you know, it was very very compelling. But then once again, straight after that kind of sequence there, you know, really when we get into the kind of you know, as we know, you know, Tom Cruise's character of John is meant to commit this murder. You know, when we get to that scene there, where he of course, changes things, or kind of doesn't. When we get to that sequence there, that's when it, once again, I just thought instantly at that moment, I'm really not, unfortunately, as compelled, with this film as I was, and from then, I just didn't really. I think the film really lost me. My engagement to the film, the emotional connection perhaps, and I found personally that the film after that, it's very much many twists, reveals perhaps, that just kept coming and never really excited me really, and I think it was much better in its first half. This film, and I think it was great actually. The first sort of hour of the film was just really. There was only a few things that I would maybe have said, kind of things that maybe I wasn't as big on, but really I was loving the film, and I think it was a great blend, of an action thriller, the sci-fi kind of, a real human sci-fi. It was very compelling, and then of course it went downhill. I think it kind of was more focused on the plot, the twists and turns, that wasn't, to me that interesting, over the character building and the world building actually. I think it, this film offered a lot more than in the end it kind of gave to me as a viewer. Personally, I think the big picture, and these kind of questions that are raised, I think, that was really, I think the way it came together, it was lacking in that sense of, the way it kind of developed these ideas, and, through the characters, of course, it just became a film that was, I found a bit convoluted in the twists, and I did get, the twists, I did understand it, but at the same time, I was just finding myself with every, kind of new turn that the film was going in, I found myself less invested, and the ending unfortunately left me cold a little bit. The ending scene, and it didn't really come together. This one, unfortunately, in its final act, it just kind of it never really regained that kind of that real thrill, that real investment, and the kind of the intrigue that it offered at first. And I think in terms of how this film started, it really, it, unfortunately for me, it was a bit disappointing. I must say that. Having said that, though, I did enjoy the film. I think it's a good film, and I think it's definitely got some real greatness in there. I think the first, almost an hour of the film, is great, and I loved this segment, of course. I think, from then on, it kind of ranged from very good, with some real interesting moments, to kind of good or maybe average at times. I think some of the characters just really took a back seat. Colin Farrell's character was so good. Danny, and I think, it was definitely lacking in the way it kind of a lot of these characters were definitely not as kind of present in the second half, and I think it's a shame what happened. Actually, I think that twist with Colin Farrell's character, as we know there, involving Max von Sydow, who's in this film, of course, Lamar, and he's a very interesting character. But I think I wasn't a big fan of the twist there. Actually, the kind of moment with Colin Farrell's character of Danny, and the death of Danny there from then as well. I thought, oh, okay, Max von Sydow is the main kind of villain of the film, and I think, I really enjoyed him in this film, but I didn't really care for the turn there either. I think there's just a few things that, in relation to the character shifts, that didn't really do it for me personally. But yes, I think, having said that, it did still remain, well directed. Had a nice. Definitely had a nice look to the film at times. There were some interesting moments later on, but really it's kind of, it's a film that gradually goes downhill. From its greatness to kind of averaging out, to kind of a good film that nears on into the very good overall film status. But for me, it's just too flawed and too kind of. It definitely loses me. It lost me quite a bit. And just the connection I had with it, and I think. At times it's a great sci-fi action, it's still an action, of course, thriller. It's a very interesting mix of genres. It's got a great performance, consistently by Tom Cruise. I think he's great in this film. As always, really for me, I think he's always very rarely have I seen a lesser performance from Cruise. You know, I'm a big fan personally of Tom Cruise, and yes, you know, had a really kind of nice mix of different characters. You know, very interesting characters. You know, Colin Farrell once again, really you know, impressed me once again. Max von Sydow, you know, mostly very good in this film. His performance, again, I'm not a big fan of some of the character you know, reveals and stuff. I think in the end, you know, there's so many twists that would do different reveals you know, in the film, and I think regardless of what was going on here, I wasn't as invested. I just didn't really care as much as I did, you know, at the beginning of the film, and for a long time, you know, as I say, for nearly an hour, I was very much loving the film, but really the rest of the film, I didn't really consistently love it. So I can't say that I love this film overall. I can't say it's a, you know, it's one of my favourite Spielbergs by no means, but at the same time, you know, it's not one of his worst. I think it's very interesting and a bold film, very unique. And yes, of course, I would look forward to watching it again and seeing if I maybe you know, the rest of the film warms on me. I doubt it, you know, because I really, you know, it just didn't quite you know, come together at all for me. But you know, based on the first hour, you know, it really was a promising, you know, great film. And yes, I did really enjoy this. You know, as an experience, I think it's a frustrating one at times, but at the same time, I must say, it's a very impressive film at times, and I think yes, once again, John Williams providing a great score, you know, and yes, I think the visuals, very mixed bag, ranging from not so you know, kind of so great to definitely very impressive, and yes, I think Minority Report is definitely an interesting film, very, you know, it's an essential watch. You know, you kind of just see for yourself what you think of this film, and you know, it could you know, offer some really interesting kind of discussions, and I look forward to hearing, of course, your thoughts on this film. But yes, Minority Report for me is a good Spielberg film, and you know, really, I loved quite a lot of this film, and at the same time, I wasn't a big fan of you know, some of the film as well, and I wasn't a fan of some of the characters, some of the twists, you know, of course, the plot points, and really the way that the film shifted from a, you know, character-driven film with great world building and real exciting scenes, and you know, really interesting, you know, kind of writing, and very human experience, and of course it did, yes, as I say, it did kind of shift, you know, and go into a lot more of a kind of a plot-driven film in a particular way, and I wasn't as invested. So yes, overall, a good Spielberg, and I will give this a very positive score of 78%. That's my final rating. You know, it's the same I gave Tintin, you know, back when I reviewed that. So yeah, it's one of these Spielbergs that I think is very much, you know, not one of my favourites, but again, not kind of at the bottom, perhaps, of my ranking. You know, it's nevertheless an interesting film. I think, as I've said before, very rarely has a Spielberg film been, you know, one that I don't care for. You know, maybe we'll get to one, perhaps, but you know, one day. But yes, I think most of the Spielberg films that I've seen, you know, I've liked. You know, I think, as I've said many times, Spielberg is one of my 5 favourite filmmakers. You know, of course, and yes, there's a reason why I wear this cap, of course, in my videos. You know, because to support and to represent, and to, of course, well, simply because I love Spielberg films, and yes, of course, I've mentioned many times how much you know, I really am just such a you know, obsessed fan of his work, and there are many films that he made, of course, that are in my you know, very extremely high on my favourites lists, and yeah, Minority Report, as I say, is a film that I liked. You know, I didn't love the film overall. I think it did go in different directions, and just not for me personally. Some of these manoeuvres, perhaps, but yes, nevertheless, a good film that I really enjoyed overall, and I think it's a very unique and interesting film, a different mix of different genres, and very interesting film indeed. And yes, tell me your thoughts. Of course, it'd be great to hear what you think of Minority Report, and yes, again, just Spielberg films in general. What do you think of his work? It'd be great to discuss his films, and yes, Minority Report. What do you think of this one? I found it very interesting, and I did enjoy this film definitely overall. So yes, a good film once again by Spielberg. Not one of my favourites, but again, very interesting, very unique film. And yes, of course, quite a nice steelbook here to kind of add to my collection. Yes, indeed, and yes, as always, take care, and yes, thanks for watching.